Emilia, the title of this show is The Great War That Could Ruin Your Retirement.
Wow. Kind of sounds
ominous.
Yes. All right, Jason, so why are we doing a show about the Great War?
Well, so many times, so when we're working with people, some of the things we hear about from them or some of the concerns that they have as they're getting ready to make this transition into retirement, and they'll talk about economic wars or trade wars, or they'll talk about terrorism. And these are all real worldly wars. But today I wanted to talk about one of my mentors, a guy named Jim Rohn. I heard him speak once about the Great War that we were born into. And he said it so eloquently, but he said there's this war you were born into, and so war between good and evil, a war between freedom and oppression, a war between darkness and light, a war between democracy and tyranny, a war between love and hate. And this just came back to me the other day. I was asked to speak, and I thought about that. And one of the things I am reminded of, or I think of, when you recognize the war, there's two things you need to do. Number one, you need to decide which side you're going to be on.
Yes.
Number two, you better pick your weapon. And I was reading about one of the greatest battles of all time. There's a story where Jesus was out in the desert, and he had been fasting for 40 days, and he comes face to face with this greatest enemy of all time. And the enemy says to him, after fasting for 40 days, he says, look, if you want to turn those rocks into bread, you can do it. And Jesus replies by reciting a verse in Deuteronomy. And 3 times he's tempted, and 3 times he recites the word from Deuteronomy. And so as we start to think about this great battle that we've all been born into, we got to talk about the words that have so much power over our minds, because if we're not getting that piece right, we could ruin and lose everything based on this war that's going on. So we want people to pick a side, and we want them to pick a weapon. And one of the great weapons I think that people need to consider are the words. And so today I wanted to talk about these words and how we can use them, and how we can use them to have a better life.
This is going to be a good one, Jason. I'm excited.
I know. Yes. I'm
Yes.
excited too, Emilia. We're so intentional when we start the show every morning. We always like to start with a joke, and we like to start with a verse, because I know how much stuff, how much garbage is being dumped into people's minds every day. And so to give them a little bit of a break from that, to me, is very important.
Yeah. So let's talk about the 4 different words, and we can start with the words we hear.
Yes. So, there's part of this exercise is making sure that the wrong words are not getting in. It's important to recognize that our brain is like fertile soil. Whatever we plant is going to grow. And the way that you get seeds into your brain are through the words that we hear and the words that we read. That is the seed that we're planting in our mind. And I heard somebody say once, they said, you can dig around in my trash can and probably find something to eat, but I wouldn't advise it. It's like, just because there's food in the garbage can doesn't mean that's what you want to pick up. And then I heard somebody else say, when you turn on the TV, I remember my sister back in college, they told her in a communications class, what bleeds leads. So they want to take the worst of the worst, and they want to pump that full of your mind. And I've visited relatives before, and in the background, they have the TV on all the time, the news, and it's just this constant stream of bad, 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 worse, 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 gross, gross, gross. And it's like, if you're feeding that into your brain every single day, how in the world are we ever going to be able to reflect light? How are we ever going to be able to make things taste a little bit better by being the salt of the earth? Well, you can't if that's what you're feeding your mind with all the time. I heard somebody say once that CNN stands for consistently negative network. CBS stands for constantly bad stuff. And Fox stands for frequently obscene and X-rated. I mean, this stuff is all, everybody out there is selling you on the bad news. And if we're letting that stuff in, we are going to lose the battle. There's nothing worse than meeting somebody that's wealthy with dollars, but their life is miserable. I meet them all the time. They're not wealthy in life, even though they have a lot of money, because of all this stuff that they've just got going through their brain all the time. It's negative, it's pessimistic, it's destructive, it's hurtful, and it's impossible to live your best life if that's your starting point. So we've got to be really careful about what we let in. And then when the bad stuff gets in there, we're told that there's a way to renew our mind, and it's through reading the good news. And so that's one of the reasons that we start with a verse every morning.
That's great. So Jason, this just reminded me, we wanted to share something with our listeners, and it's basically along the same lines that we're going to be having a replay of a webinar that you recorded last year on the topic of living your best year. And this is where you can just start by hearing positive things that people share with you. So I want to remind our listeners, we're going to be posting this webinar replay on sound retirement planning, and it's going to be on the right-hand side of the page, and it's going to be a webinar replay, living your best year.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that came to be, Emilia, is I have a friend who recently said to me, "How are things going, Jason?" I said, they're amazing. This has been absolutely the best year of my entire life in every way. And I could tell when I said that to him, he was a little bit irritated with me, because he has had some challenges, but a lot of it's perspective. But Emilia, every year for the last probably close to 10 years now, maybe even more than that, but I get together with a group of guys every Friday we meet, but then once a year we get together in January, and we just have this, we've made it kind of a formal process, and there are 7 exercises we go through on how to design a really great year. And last year I shared that replay, that webinar replay, but I think I did it later in January. So the reason I wanted to do the replay is I want to give people the tools to be able to do this starting in December, so that by the time we get to January, they've already got this plan designed for what their best year is going to look like.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that with everyone. So Jason, we're going to move on to we were doing 4 different words. And the second that we'd like to do is, will you share a story about how the words we say to others and ourselves can make people feel?
Yeah, again, we have to understand that words have power. I mean, we started this thing out with this verse in John 1, which says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then if you look at Genesis 1:3, the verse says that God spoke, and there came light into the world. And it's like, wow, the power of words. You're telling me that we have power to create, to build up, to encourage, to inspire people, or we have, with our words, the ability to tear down, to destroy, to deceive, to hurt. Boy, that's an incredible choice that you get to make. And I love, there's a verse that says, we get to, when you're picking sides in this war, the verse says, look, you can either be piping hot or you can be ice cold, but if you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And it's like, whoa, you mean there's a price to pay for middle ground, for mediocre, for not wanting to pick a side? And there is a price to pay. And so the first thing you got to do when you recognize the war is pick a side, and then give it everything you got with everything you got. That's what we're asking people to do. But when it comes to the words that we say to others, I have a story that I want to share. Yes. That is not a proud moment for me. In fact, I paid a very heavy price to learn this lesson, so I feel like if I can share it with everybody else, that maybe they won't make the same mistake. But this goes all the way back to when I was in 5th grade, and there were a group of us, me and Rob and Dave and Matt and John and Bromveer, just this group of kids that we all hung out at recess. Well, 5th grade is kind of that, I don't know about you, but this was an awkward stage. I remember in 5th grade, this is when boys and girls, there started to be boyfriends and girlfriends, and people would hold hands at recess, and it's like, what is going on,
Yeah.